can you keep a secret?
Changing hearts and minds.
Changing hearts and minds.
Changing hearts and minds.
Changing hearts and minds.
Changing hearts and minds. Changing hearts and minds. Changing hearts and minds.
Changing hearts and minds.
Welcome to Change Your POV podcast. You're listening to Changing Hearts and Minds, a show about reviving the warrior spirit and remembering the past to improve our future. I'm your host, Jeff Adamick. Let's get this party started.
Ladies and gentlemen, am I totally screwed or what? You're funny.
I want to discuss all this behavior.
Let me out of here!
Welcome to Changing Hearts and Minds. I'm your host, Jeff Adamick, and guys, I'm going to be honest with you. It feels good to be back. Obviously, if you're a diehard listener of Changing Hearts and Minds, you've probably been checking the site, checking the internet blogs and the internet space from probably 2 months now, wondering where the hell is Jeff's new episode. Well, you know, guys, Changing Hearts and Minds is not my full-time job. Newsflash, I'm not raking in the dollars on there. I mean, that's up to you guys, really. So if you want to blame anyone for me not being around, blame yourselves for not friggin' donating to Patreon. But I do have a regular job that I did have a bunch of audit stuff and, cycle work that comes in with it that caused me to have to step away from getting shows done. And it's been about 2 weeks since that all ended. But then when you're not actively trying to get shows produced and pre-production and people getting lined up, it takes a while for you to get guys lined up to do shows. So about 2 weeks ago, I was able to free up my time. And then about this week, I was able to start getting people on. So you got shows coming at you, a bunch of different shows, a bunch of hopefully fun shows. But out of complete respect for my man, the first guy I brought back on is Andrew McDowell. Because if I don't have him on the show, for God's sakes, who's gonna have him? I'm just kidding, Andrew.
Nobody.
No. Andrew's a good find, man, and I love having him on my show because he is a fine addition to it. So, Andrew, how you doing, buddy?
I am great. How are you?
We just went through all that. I mean, how I am.
Okay, well, but good. I'm glad to hear that you are functional again.
Yeah, I know. I wasn't dysfunctional. I was just busy.
Well,
A lot of people get the things confused. Believe me, if I'm off the rails, batshit crazy out there, you're gonna know it. There's not gonna be any question about it. I do not go quietly into that good night if you want to say so. I'm a rage against the dying of the light kind of guy. People are gonna know if I'm off my meds. People are gonna know. So, yeah. So how's your last couple of weeks for you been? I mean, really, seriously, I've been so like out of touch that I haven't even caught up with you guys.
Yeah. So I've been on a little hiatus from my show due to some craziness on my part. Also being the summer, there's not a lot of hunting stuff to talk about right now. But I am starting a new gig on Monday, which is really exciting. And the baby turned 1, like the day after we last talked, the day before we last talked. It's been a freaking whirlwind.
I mean, how is that going for you, man? How is fatherhood going for you? Honestly, let's skip all the bullshit and just get down to what people really want to know about Andrew's life. What's it like being a dad, man?
I haven't been thrown up on this much since I was in college.
It's
but
funny
other than that,
it all comes full circle, doesn't it?
Exactly. It really does. It really does. I spent the first 34 years of my life trying to avoid being a father, and now it's all I want to do. So
yeah. Well, it's like the whole thing with and pardon me getting a little vulgar, but it's vagina. You spend the first 9 months of your life trying to get out of it, and then the rest of your life trying to get back into it.
Get back in it. Yep. Yes, sir.
So
that is exactly
sadly
correct.
true. And for those of you who are good Christian folk out there listening to my show, come on, people.
Come on. Did
you expect less from me? I'm going to throw out some inappropriate jokes.
And even good Christian folk are trying to get in it.
And bad Christian folk and good Christian folk, everyone. Yep. It doesn't matter where you fall in the category of religious or moral grounds. You are trying to get in there. And again, good luck. Good luck, buddy, because we could all use a little luck when it comes to that.
Yes, sir.
So,
Yes, sir.
Wow, that was a deep hole that we went down. Oh, yeah. Look at the puns coming out of me. All right, let's get into talking about what this
Yep.
week's show's about, so I don't lose all the friggin' decent folk before they get out of here and they don't hear this actually really good show we put together. So me and Andrew have been on a little bit of a. All right, so full disclosure, my favorite war is the Civil War. I mean, that's not been.
Yep.
I haven't done many shows on my show on the Civil War, and by that I mean none. Because I have so much information on it that I kind of want to make sure that when I do shows like that, it's really well done. But I didn't realize
talked about the Hunley though.
we talked about
the
but that
Hunley.
was a piece of something.
Piece
It
of
wasn't a
something
show
larger.
that was directly dedicated to the Civil War, and those are coming. I mean, you are going to get a total warfare. The application of total warfare by Sherman and Grant, and you're going to get all kinds of stuff from them. I promise you guys, you'll get them. But right now, me and Andrew, we're kind of on a Revolutionary War kick.
Yep.
And it goes all the way back to the beginning of the show. We started out with the Battle of Trenton, and there is no intent behind me picking New Jersey battles. This just happens to be two battles that were both very influential and very important. So a couple weeks ago, I was watching some TV show on the History Channel, and they were talking about Von Stueben, the man who created friggin' Train the Trainer, the man who created friggin' the NCO creed, the NCO way of training, lead by example. This guy really was the person who instilled this into the American mindset. That coffee's not frozen anymore. Andrew is taking a nice big sip of it. I'm happy to see.
No,
that.
it's still partially frozen.
Just so you guys know, if you did miss it because I cut it out, but Andrew has a frozen coffee, and not iced coffee, but frozen coffee because he put it in his freezer and he's slowly sipping on it. Good for you, Andrew. So anyway, back to Von Stueben. So Von Stueben did all this. Andrew's trying to hold it together as best he could. Apparently, I had my drug rug sweatshirt on earlier, and now Andrew's probably taking a break and toked a little bit up because he's loopy. He's watching his kid. He's not smoking weed.
Nope.
Anyway, back to Stueben again. As we come back around again to Stueben, the guy really did. The way the military runs nowadays, as far as the NCOs and their effect on the military as a whole, is absolutely a direct reflection of the way he trained stuff. And he didn't take this kind of training from somewhere. Well, as when we go into it, we'll talk about it. He actually looked at the way the Americans interacted with each other and the culture of America, and he took classic old school training and he morphed it to fit that. And the ability to do that, and the ability to train the trainer and train these guys to go out there and lead and to give the NCOs a bigger role in dealing with the soldiers and leading the soldiers and training the soldiers, the effects of it were directly seen right after Valley Forge ended, up to the actual events of the Battle of Monmouth, which is what we are going to talk about today. So basically, guys, the war for independence was not going well for the colonials at all. In 1775, the British were caught off guard by the outbreak of hostilities at Lexington and Concord. I mean, they really were. They saw it kind of coming, but the things that occurred afterwards, and we are going to go into a show on Breed's Hill and stuff like that, they were really caught off guard by the tenacity and the desire to win that the colonials had. Would you say that's a fair assessment?
I think that it was total war, total commitment after among the Patriot cause. It wasn't exactly a national thing. Right.
I mean, was it 3%? 3% of the total population partook in the revolution. But that was enough, and those guys' efforts were enough to put some serious hindrances on the British ability to control what was going on in the colonies. Due to the international low British troop numbers, coupled with poor response initially by the British Crown, and then the Loyalist militias, the Loyalist militias were continuing to lose to Patriot militias. In 1776 in South Carolina, much of the colonies were, for a very short time, completely under Patriot colonial rule. And if you guys ever saw the movie The Patriot, they all get called to Charleston in the beginning of that movie. This is that time period where you see, the colonials have control. And then where we're going to in this story is immediately that transition scene where you see the American flag above the city of Charleston, and then it fades to 6 months later. You see the British flag over the city of Charleston, and the doom and gloom of the British iron grip rule over the South. And there's a cat that is stalking you from behind. I'm just letting you know. He's there, letting you know that.
Thank you. Thank you for the heads up.
Parliament optimized on established treaties with small German states, purchasing Hessian military forces. We've talked about the Hessians before in other shows, and increased troop and naval forces. Quickly, an army of 32,000 was sent to America to put an end to the colonial revolution. This 32,000 strong army was the largest force sent outside of Europe in that time period. So we talk about there wasn't a very large force in America, but yet still it was the largest imperialistic force that was outside of America at the time period. The overwhelming increase of British armed forces and the unfortunate lack of accurate military intelligence for General Washington led to some disasters for the Continental Army, some big disasters. The British Army, under the command of General William Howe, outflanked and forced Washington's army out of New York. Soon after, the British systematically reestablished military control over New York, Rhode Island, and Philadelphia. And this is very important at the time. These were hubs of, international trade, hubs of everything that happened in the colonies, happened in those cities. Soon, the British systematically... All right, I already said that. Despite a bold victory by the Continental forces on Christmas Day at the Battle of Trenton, which we talked about, the British continued to win decisive victory after decisive victory. I mean, we're talking about major wins. From January 1777 until October 1777, 27 battles historically recorded. The British are recorded as the victors in 18 of those 27 battles. And that's quite a difference in statistics right there. 66% victory rate for the British. That's pretty damn good when you're talking about major battles. The Continental casualties from January 1777 to October 1777 was 3,354. Now you're thinking about that in the confines of how many soldiers did they actually have. 10,000, I think, is the amount they had at any given time. So 3,000, almost 3,500 soldiers out of 10,000. That's a third of your forces. I mean, just gone.
Yep, 35%.
The Battle of Brandywine alone, which was a British victory, had over 1,300 Americans killed in action alone. I mean, that's the big one they talk about. That's the one that really kicks everyone's ass. September of 1777, after the British took Philadelphia, and after failing to retake the city, Washington led his 12,000-person army into the winter quarters at Valley Forge, located approximately 18 miles northwest of Philadelphia. They remained there for 6 months, from December 19th, 1977 to June 19th, 1778. But I don't want to just jump to 1778. I want to talk about what were some of the things that happened during the time period leading into Valley Forge and at Valley Forge. I'm going to turn it over to Andrew. Andrew, tell us a little bit about what was going on there at Valley Forge and the lead up into and the effects of that stuff at Valley Forge.
Sure. So when you hear the name Valley Forge, what comes to mind is a winter of privation. You think about pictures of George Washington like all muffled up in a coat on his horse walking through a camp of hovels and people starving, and that's not far from the truth. That's
it's pretty accurate.
Precisely what happened. What at its most basic level occurred was the Continental Army had a severe supply crisis. There wasn't enough food coming in. There weren't enough goods coming in. There wasn't enough anything to really keep things going. And because they went into winter camp relatively late, because they were on the run from the British, they didn't have time to lay in the type of supplies that you normally would.
And supplies also refer to personnel, right?
Yep.
So like you have a mass amount of defectors. You have people that are just like, man, this ain't working out. I'm going to get out of here. Or the guys who were just their terms of service were coming up.
Correct. One of the ongoing things you see in George Washington's letters and a lot of the correspondence and journals of officers in the Continental Army was, we have 1,000 men from Massachusetts who have signed a 6-month term and they want to go home now. And we have no way of keeping them here other than offering them bribes of money that we don't have.
Right.
Or appealing to
couldn't even
their
pay the money
patriotism.
they owed them to begin with, right?
Exactly. And frequently it was the appeal to patriotism that kept them where they were in ranks versus going home, which is, I think, remarkable. I don't think anybody really signs up to the military to get rich, but
wait, what?
I know, right? Being paid below minimum wage for your work when you take in all the time. Yeah, it's out there. And it was especially so back in the Revolutionary period. So the appeal to patriotism under privation was, frankly, pretty ballsy.
Yes.
But it worked.
But it worked because they were guys who stuck around, and God bless them for that, because it wasn't like they were an established government that they were going to come around and get this all worked out. These were rebel forces, man. These guys were in essence just friggin' criminals.
Let's call a spade, and I don't mean this disparagingly, but they were traitors. I mean, they were British citizens who took up arms against the government. They called 1777 the year of the hangman for a couple of different reasons.
Right.
One, because the 3 sevens look like gallows, but also because this was the pivotal point where the revolutionary leadership was either going to go see the hangman or break free. With that digression aside, what we have going on in Valley Forge is privation. About up to, depending on who you ask, about 2,000 soldiers died to disease, illness, starvation, all of which were exacerbated significantly by malnutrition. Because as we said, they didn't have enough supplies coming in.
Right.
And it wasn't to say that there wasn't a lot of food around, but the U.S. government, or the revolutionary government, didn't have the funds to purchase it. So their credit could only extend so far.
True story.
What ended up happening to make the winter at Valley Forge a success was, frankly, a couple of things. But first, we, meaning the colonials, had established a plan, or had established an alliance with the French government. Officially,
shaky alliance, really, at first. I mean, because it wasn't like they were, begrudgingly supporting us. But there was no official treaty signed. But I mean, it was a good call by Franklin and Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson to look for these guys, because they were the ones who really loved to see the British get their comeuppance.
Yep, exactly. And we'll travel back in time in a couple of minutes, but you know, it has to do with the whole Lafayette thing. So we have this tentative alliance with the French, and what was relatively common to happen then was foreign military leadership would come and visit and see what was going on.
Right.
So Washington took advantage of this leadership in-house to establish his, for lack of a better term, ragtag group of colonial militia who were depressed and disheartened and demoralized and young and broken and young and farmers. They were not the British professional soldiery. Right. And he used this time to train them to become a disciplined and respected army that could go toe-to-toe against the most experienced, strongest, and best-led military in the world at the time.
Yeah.
And this is where we see two individuals come in, both of which we've already talked about, but we're calling them the Frenchman and the German.
Yeah, not the American and the American, but I mean the Frenchman and the German. So the shaky alliance that we had with the French and the absolute no alliance that we had with the Hessians, both loaned us two men that had very much to do with what happened later.
So the first one of them that we're going to talk about, and we're not putting precedence or importance on the order here, was this gentleman named Friedrich Wilhelm August Heinrich Ferdinand Stueben, also known as, I know, wait until we talk about Lafayette. He was also known as Baron Von Stueben. He was born in September of 1730 in Magdeburg, Germany. He came from a military family. His father was a Prussian engineer named Captain Baron Wilhelm von Stueben. His father...
Very, very, very royal sounding names here, huh?
German aristocracy, man. You know, you got the Von in there. Baron Von Stueben. He sounds like a Bond villain.
Sounds like someone that's going to start World War I.
Von Steuben's father had served broadly in Europe, including serving Empress Anna of Russia. And during this service, Friedrich Baron von Stueben, the younger, traveled with him and grew up in this military culture. He first joined the Prussian army at the age of 17 and became an officer relatively quickly, serving during the 7 Years' War in Europe and North Americas, where that raged, and was just one of the leading causes that caused the British to raise taxes on Americans to pay for the war, that led to the revolution. During von Steuben's service in the 7 Years' War, he was wounded twice in his service, first in 1757 at the Battle of Prague, and then again in 1759 at the Battle of Kunsdorf.
Andrew, real quick, I want to bring in the injury thing with sure. these guys back then. So, all right, I was injured a number of times in war, right? You're talking about, explosive, close to explosions, give me maybe a little TBI. When you get historically marked as being injured back then, we're talking about severe wounds. These aren't guys who got like a cut on a door, maybe came down with a little bit of, trench foot. They didn't really report that kind of stuff. They just sucked it up. So when you hear a guy gets injured twice, we're talking about what would in modern day times be maybe career ending injuries, but yet these guys sucked it up and went through. So, keep that in mind as we talk about these guys. These injuries that they got were not light injuries. These were fairly historic injuries, worthy of being mentioned.
And if you think about the ballistics at the time, firing a 50 caliber musket ball or getting hit by a 32-pound cannonball, not by any means denigrating the suffering of modern soldiers, but when you factor in that medicine at the time was rudimentary or downright terrifyingly primitive, it really is amazing to think that somebody could get shot with a musket ball in the leg or the shoulder or the arm.
50 caliber under unsanitary conditions, come back and keep fighting. Right.
Is I think it is really impressive.
Very impressive. Thank you. Go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt you. I just wanted to make a point that these injuries are not just to be written off. I mean, these guys had some massive injuries done to him.
Massive injuries. And then recovery was almost as bad as the injury itself.
True story.
So after and during the 7 Years' War, he was promoted to captain and actually ended up attracting some imperial attention and served as an aide to Frederick the Great, who was one of the great German Prussian emperors, leaders of the period.
Yes, sir.
When the 7 Years' War ended in 1763, Baron von Stueben was one of the many soldiers who served valiantly, but were reduced. Where there was a reduction in force in the military, and he was basically forced out of his position in the Prussian army.
Right.
Which is not uncommon. You see this throughout history. You saw it after World War I. You see it after World War II. You saw it after Vietnam, and you're seeing it now in the modern era where some of the ranks are shrinking.
Jeff Adamek.
Jeff Adamek, exactly. From 1764 to 1777, Baron von Stueben served as the German prince's Hofmarschall, which is an administrative official in charge of a princely German court which supervised all its economic affairs. So he wasn't just a military mind. He clearly had some brains behind him in fields that weren't purely military. Von Stueben also accompanied Frederick the Great to France during the time period, and it was during this time that he was introduced to the French Minister of War, Claude Louis. In 1777, Claude Louis introduced Baron von Stueben to Benjamin Franklin.
I would have loved to have seen that in that meeting.
I think it would have been one of the all-time meetings, just knowing Franklin's personality.
And knowing the allegations against von Stueben later on, they must have had a good party.
Yep. And I think
that'll make sense later.
It'll make a lot of sense. We're alluding to something that followed von Stueben around a little bit. So after he meets Franklin, he basically decides to go to America to help fight the war, or at least to observe and see what's going on and learn some lessons. The French court provided the Continental Congress an endorsement, a letter of introduction saying, this guy's great. He knows what he's doing. You guys should hire him and give him rank in the American Army. However, the Continental Congress, for one reason or another, declined to do so.
Well, let's be honest. It probably has a lot to do with the allegations at first.
Yep.
And the fact that the French didn't want to send one of their own guys, but yet send someone else. I think this has to do with that shaky ground where the French weren't ready to fully commit
to what was going on. And Jeff and I moments ago were alluding to some allegations about von Stueben. And one of them was that, true or not, he was and I use this term advisedly, knowing the time period, accused of being homosexual.
He was accused of being a homosexuality?
Yep, he was accused of being homosexuality. He was accused of being gay. And I use the term accused purposely. It was universally frowned upon by society, by leadership, by everybody, to be gay in this time period. So he did
not just military, but just to be gay at all.
Everywhere, period, anywhere. Von Stueben faced persecution in the court being Frederick the Great's court,
right,
in society and the military. And von Stueben knew in real terms that once these allegations broke out and were commonly known, it would end any chance of further service in the European military. So yet another reason why he came to the Americas to fight in the revolution.
Right.
Tried to continue to make a name for himself. Von Stueben eventually got to North America and was introduced to George Washington via letters from Ben Franklin as Lieutenant General in the King of Prussia's service, which obviously, as we know before, is not true. This was either, I think, misdirection on Ben Franklin's part.
Well done, by the way. Well done, misdirection.
Well, very well done. Or a bad translation of his service record. He comes to America and is not paid up front. He doesn't receive regular wages, but he joins the military, and basically an agreement is struck that he will be paid at the completion of the war according to his contributions to the Continental Army.
Right. And that's I think that was a fair, considering the situation they were in. I think that was a fair contract, personally.
And you do see one of the things that occurs in the Revolutionary War, especially for the Americans, is officers weren't paid and they weren't compensated as you would expect them to be. One of the reasons that Benedict Arnold leaves is Benedict Arnold almost gets his left leg blown off and has all of his goods seized, has his boat seized, all this bad stuff financially happens to him, and they say, we'll pay at the end. This is a privilege to lead these troops, and you should be
after putting
proud.
his entire his financial life on the line, and I mean, let's not get it twisted, and not to go off on a tangent there, but he was a very well respected soldier, very well liked by people. So there is a debate historically as to whether or not he was done wrong by the Continentals, and we could do that in a different episode, but we're not going to disparage, nor after seeing and reading some of the things in Washington's Spies, I would hold off on disparaging him because he maybe had some legitimate gripes.
So just back to von Stueben, we can infer that because there's no mention or investigation into the allegations of homosexuality by anybody in either the Continental Congress or the Army, that the contract to await pay until after the war was based on either not caring about the allegations or a conscious disregard of what was going on. Even in quote unquote liberal America, homosexuality was still illegal. And again, we need to drive this home. It wasn't controversial. It was just outright quote unquote wrong at the time. It was illegal. Yeah. It was wrong. It was discriminated against, and you could do so without any repercussions. Things have changed, but maybe not enough.
So yes, so Stueben arrived at Valley Forge then in February of 1778, right after this complete disregard of, not disregard, but this overlooking of these allegations, which good on the Continental Army for doing this. I really think it was a good call. And as we said, it led to some good things in the long run. Now let's talk a little bit about Stueben as a person. He was a very large man, and with his obvious military composure, he immediately made an impression on the troops encamped at Valley Forge. Now there's no mention historically as to whether or not the allegations of homosexuality followed him to the lower ranks. I don't think even if they had, it would have made much of a difference considering the impression he made upon the troops with his large size, his military composure, his demeanor. He really did leave a very good first impression with the men. In a quote on the way the men viewed von Stueben, it was quoted, "Of the ancient fabled god of war, he seemed to me a perfect personification of Mars. The trappings of his horse, the enormous holsters of his pistols, his large size, and his strikingly martial aspect all seemed to favor the idea. He turned the volunteers into a great army. Now, when you put homosexual allegations into that statement again, it becomes a very funny statement. His large size, but I digress. Because I am not I have no I'm not anti-homosexual, but it's funny. I have some gay friends who would think that was a very funny statement. So, but anyway, so yeah, he was a large dude. He was imposing. He carried himself in a manner that really demanded respect. Stueben was appointed temporary inspector general by Washington, and that's a big role to have. Inspector general in the military. That's pretty much the only role that has any kind of authority over the regular guys. Even the generals have to follow the inspector general's, guidance and what he finds to be right and wrong. He inspected the camp's living conditions, equipment, and the military bearing of the troops, and much back to what you talked about before, the manner in which they were able to supply and conduct resupplies for all of the guys out there in the field. He then made recommendations on the standards of sanitation and camp layouts. These standards would still be used a century and a half after he implemented them. Rows of tents based on rank structure, kitchen and latrine facilities were to be placed on separate sides of the camp, with the latrines placed on the downhill side. And that sounds like massively friggin' rudimentary, but this is something that he actually implemented that wasn't being done. And then following the positive effects of the Continental Army from Baron Von Steuben's recommendations, General Washington convinced Congress to appoint him the official Inspector General of the Army and give him the rank and pay of Major General. And so now Stueben is no longer pay you later guy. He is now a paid member of the Continental Army. Stueben cleaned up the administration and financial issues the Army had and saved the Army massive amounts of funds by implementing an inventory and inspection system that was immediately felt throughout the ranks. Steuben's most famous influence into the Continental Army was during the Valley Forge winter, his training programs. Pretty much this is the one that really, really made him stand out among everyone else. In the European military system, officers held consummate power and responsibility for all aspects of military planning, training, and tactics on and off the battlefield. This is just something that absolutely was in the officers' hands. General Von Stueben saw the colonial military relied heavily on the non-commissioned officers, or NCOs, to be in charge of training and troop bearing and discipline. Now, I don't know if this is because the officers at the time were like, look, if I'm not going to get paid, I don't want to have the responsibility, or if there was really a trust in those NCOs by the officers. But either way, it worked out great because he saw that and he optimized on that mindset. He knew discipline and training was the cornerstone of an effective and fearless military. He also wanted to rely heavily on the colonists' culture and to tap into their abilities. He also knew that he did not have the time to develop a training program for him and his cadre to train all of the Continental Army himself in the time that he had. So, General Von Stueben came up with a training system that is still used today and is the cornerstone of the military training system. He developed and implemented what we call train the trainer. And even in the civilian world now, train the trainer is something that is used all the time. This man, he invented this. Stueben selected 120 men from various regiments to form Washington's honor guard. He trained them to be the troops who would go out and train the officers and NCOs at the regiment levels in uniformity, maneuvers, tactics, and military bearing. And the regimental officers and NCOs then handled the training to their next level down themselves until the system was in place. This training was referred to as the School of the Soldier, both with and without arms. So there was a School of the Soldier without arms, which was just a discipline, administrative stuff. And then with arms, which was getting in line, following, troop maneuver training, shooting when you're told to shoot, standing fast, all that kind of stuff. The responsibility of the troops being trained was the commanders of the units. However, the training itself was conducted by the NCOs, and this was designed into the process on purpose and worked massively well. So Stueben focused much of his training on using the bayonet. This is just something that he thought wasn't being utilized correctly, and so he wanted to focus on it because, these guys aren't freaking like marksmen shooting 200 meters. So these battles are getting very close and very, intimate. So he wanted to utilize. This was in concert with the Continental Army and its departure from classic standardized combat tactics. They aimed to keep formations and follow firing line orders as trained, but there was an unconventional nature to the breaking of lines in close combat, and it was encouraged as Stueben saw the benefit of this new form of warfare. He wanted to feed the beast, if so to speak, and the nature of the unconventional methods that they had. So early in the war, the troops used the bayonet as mainly a cooking utensil and a skewer for meals rather than a weapon of combat. Stueben introduced the bayonet charges early in training. He made it a standardized tactic rather than a last-ditch effort emergency tactic. And this training showed its effectiveness in the Battle of Stony Point, when the U.S. troops attacked and unloaded muskets. They won the battle using Steuben's tactics and training after they ran out of ammo. The British had not, they did, and they still won the battle using bayonets. The greatest display of this new Continental Army post-Valley Forge and its new effectiveness, as it was trained and disciplined, would come to be known as to the world on June 28, 1778, in Monmouth County, New Jersey, what has historically now been called the Battle of Monmouth. So, Andrew, tell us a little bit about the lead up to this historic battle, which, just so full disclosure, this historic battle that took place where I lived, where I grew up in New Jersey. I grew up 2 blocks away from the Monmouth battlegrounds. So
That's really cool.
Yeah, so I grew up right there, right by Molly Pitcher's Well.
That's awesome. In May of 1777, the British commander of all the forces in North America was General Sir Henry Clinton. He was ordered to evacuate Philadelphia and move his forces to concentrate his troops to defend New York City. Now, New York City is
Sir Henry Clinton. Sir Henry Clinton. All I can think about is, Hillary, we got to get these colonials.
Or the Parliament Funkadelic.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, no problem. New York is a very important city internationally now, but in the colonial period, it was equally important. And if you think about the geography of where a lot of this fighting was occurring, it was dead smack in the middle of between New England, where the Revolution really started, and the South, where a lot of the people and a lot of the soldiers would eventually come from. And by the South, I don't mean Florida. I mean
North Carolina,
South Carolina, Delaware, Maryland, southern, the southern colonies. The relocation to New York City was in response to France entering the war on the colonist side, as we've talked about a couple of times up above. On June the 18th of 1777, the British began evacuating its 11,000 and Hessian regulars from Philadelphia and moving them north. They were, however, slowly making their way north, and this was because of efforts by the colonials to slow them down, specifically burning bridges, building obstacles, dropping trees across roads, and dumping mud and the like into wells so the British couldn't water their troops. You notice that they dumped mud, not dead animals or excrement or something like that, because they were hoping that in the near future they'd be able to come back and use these wells. So muddying wells is a better approach than rendering them permanently useless by truly polluting them. So these attempts not only slowed the British movement, but ended up stretching the British forces out over a 12-mile area on their road march. And this lack of consolidation and inability for the British to bring all their troops together to any standardized maneuvers really resulted in the British not being able to defend their entire force and not being able to bring it all to bear in a timely fashion. General Washington, observed an opportunity to take advantage of this situation. He called a council of war on the 24th of June and stated his intention to move deliberately out of Valley Forge with his troops and attack the British column. During the council, Washington's generals were largely divided on the issue of the operation, about whether or not it should go forward.
Right.
One major general, Charles Lee.
Stand-up guy, really.
Yeah, terrific gentleman. I need to emphasize this, not to be confused with Light Horse Harry Lee, who was literally a stand-up guy and a good leader.
Or Lee, the guy that ran the Confederate Army. No relation there either.
Not related to Charles Lee, related to Light Horse Lee.
Right.
Yep. So this Charles Lee, stand-up guy, was Washington's second in command and the unofficial leader of the generals who opposed this plan. Charles Lee had prior military experience to the Revolution. He served actually in the British Army during the French and Indian War, which was unusual among colonial leadership of the military. During this time, an American Indian who was allied with the British named him Boiling Water. This was a clear reference to his short fuse and
wasn't a reference to his ability to make ramen.
Nope, it was not. or create safe drinking water. It was because he would throw temper tantrums.
I misunderstood everything that Indian said.
Damn, should have been paying closer attention. There are some with Charles Lee. There are some references to him being the target of an assassination attempt by his own men.
Right.
They tried to frag him, basically.
Yeah, this guy he seemed to really like win hearts and minds everywhere he went.
Exactly. He was clearly very well loved and respected by his men and those around him.
He seemed very, to me, it seemed very British aristocracy. You know, I'm above you all kind of attitude from this guy.
Yeah, and some of the other stuff I think that I've read somewhere was he had a lot of problems with debt and was looking for a quick payday and was looking for promotion and saw himself as a better leader than Washington and was jealous of position and whatnot. I think he might have actually, when they were both in the British Army, Washington and Lee, I think Lee might have outranked Washington, so there's a little bit of butthurt about Washington getting promoted.
Yes, that's a good point because General Lee was a regular British officer, where Washington was a militia officer, born in the colonies, where Lee was born in Europe. He was So yes, there was very much a disdain for Washington's position in the Continental Army from Lee.
So Lee also served in the Polish Army. This was done in, as we just referred to, an attempt to enhance his rank. He learned that he wasn't going to get the rank he thought he deserved, so he ended up quitting the Polish Army too and coming to America.
Even the Polish Army wouldn't promote him.
So he was clearly a real winner. When the revolution began, he volunteered to serve with the rebel forces, assuming that given his prior service and experience, he'd be commander-in-chief in the Continental Army.
I mean, and not assuming that's a speculation. He actually wrote that he assumed that he would be the commander-in-chief.
Correct. Yep. And clearly that didn't work out too well for him.
No, it didn't.
Especially when George Washington, the rustic, as I think Lee might call him, was appointed as commander-in-chief. And all of this shitting that we're doing all over Charles Lee is well deserved, not only because he seemed to be an asshole.
I will not apologize for it. It is well deserved.
And he was also not a particularly great commander in the field. In 1776, his troops suffered loss after loss after loss, and he was eventually captured and held by the British until he was released in 1778 during a prisoner exchange.
Under promise to never pick up arms against the British again.
Correct.
So a lot of the releasing of officers back in that time period was based on them promising to never pick up arms again. So even against the British military, he had no intention of fulfilling his promises or obligations because immediately upon release, he ran right back to the Continental Army.
And was welcomed back with open arms as second in command of the Continental Army. The fools. So jumping back to New Jersey, during the Council of War that Washington called, Lee advised that the colonials would be best served by awaiting further developments in the situation, and that committing the American forces against the British at this time would be ill-advised. There was a headshed, a brainstorm, and a debate about how best to move forward with the attack. I think it's interesting that Washington didn't just say, this is what we're doing, go make it happen. He actually was open to debate and conversation. At the end of the day, however, Washington decided to send 4,000 troops in advance to strike the British rear as they departed Monmouth Courthouse in Monmouth, New Jersey, near Jeff's hometown. Lee still was encouraging Washington to be cautious and advised only harassing attacks with light forces, these light infantry, what you would call skirmishers.
Very judicious the way you're saying it. He didn't just, I'll say it, he didn't just, he made it clear that he had no intention of promoting Washington's plan. And obviously I'm going to let you do the whammy of his ultimate friggin' scumbag move here.
Sure.
Go ahead.
So Washington still said, nope, just let's go right at him. Let's not worry. Let's strike while the iron's hot, and chose to go forward with an attack on the rear of 4,000 troops. Lee said, when offered the command, said, nah, I'm good. Mm-hmm. So Washington in turn increased the force to 5,000, which was half of his available troops. and turned and offered the command to the Marquis of Lafayette.
My man.
So Lafayette was a young guy when he joined the military. When he joined the military, he was 14. But when he joined the Continental Army, he was only 19 years old and had zero combat experience. He definitely got some, but he was not exactly a seasoned commander or seasoned military veteran like Von Stueben was.
No, but he was very well educated in at least. Yes, very well educated.
Yep, and he had one hell of a name. His full name, the Marquis of Lafayette.
There we go.
Was Marie Joseph Paul Yves Gilbert du Montier, better known as the Marquis de Lafayette, or in America we more commonly just call him General Lafayette.
The man who Fayetteville, North Carolina, where I live now, is named after.
I did not know that.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. So it's all just coming full circle for you.
It is. That's why I picked this one, because I can tie into it multiple times.
He was a close friend of Alexander Hamilton, Thomas Jefferson, and not just a close friend of General Washington. General Washington considered him his son.
Yes, very much so.
The relationship there was not commander subordinate; it was father son.
He was
brother.
If Washington was Batman, he was Robin.
And not like the Burt Ward Robin, like the Nightwing Robin, who could actually kick some serious ass.
True story.
There we go. We got our nerd references in.
Nice. We got it in there. I knew we could get it in there. I had faith in us.
I did too. And when Lafayette joined the American Army at 19, it wasn't as a lieutenant. It was as a major general in the Continental Army. There was some pretty serious trust placed in him.
Now, do you think that has something to do with us trying to encourage the French to kind of join in the war? But like, look at what we offer your military commanders. I mean, not to say anything disparaging about Lafayette's ability to lead. There's some political moves in that I think were made. You know, it's the fact that he trusted this guy so much, and let's take advantage of that trust, and we'll use it as a political move. We'll give this guy a major general billet post.
Some of that, but what I think one of the two things you have to keep in mind when it comes to Lafayette is King Louis of France ordered Lafayette not to go to America and not to join the American forces, because when Lafayette came over, King Louis wasn't looking for a war with England. They were still recovering from some of the wars in Europe, the 7 Years' War, and they just weren't ready for a fight against the English.
Okay.
So, you know, I think that there definitely was politics, but I think also Washington, with a few exceptions, notably Lee and Benedict Arnold, was a pretty good judge of character, and I think he saw kind of the intrinsic value that and potential in Lafayette and went with his gut. The other aside that I just want to mention about Lafayette before we go too far into him is that Lafayette actually was encouraged by somebody to go to America and join the revolution, and it was a somewhat unlikely source. King George, the King of England, his own brother convinced Lafayette to go and join the war in North America. Now,
Andrew, I'm going to let you go down a rabbit hole with this one. I can't wait to hear why this happened. Sure.
So just like in modern days, families don't always get along particularly well. And I'm going to quote directly. This is from history.com. I'm going to quote it directly. In August 1775, Lafayette attended a dinner party at which Great Britain's Duke of Gloucester, the younger brother of King George III, was the guest of honor. The Duke, who had been condemned by the king over his recent choice of bride, hit back at his royal brother's policies in the American colonies and praised the exploits of liberty-loving Americans at the opening battles of the American Revolution at Lexington and Concord several months earlier.
Nice.
Lafayette, whose father died in 1759 fighting the British during the 7 Years' War, received the inspiration he needed to strike back against the empire. Quote, "From that hour," he wrote, "I could think of nothing but this enterprise and resolved to go to Paris at once to make further inquiries."
Nice. Well done, sir.
I know.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you for that, man. I didn't know that. That's
yeah. That's one of my favorite Lafayette facts that I found recently in my reading. So I thought I would include that and provide a little bit of context for why he actually went.
I know you also said something about having some facts about Lafayette that were unknown. Is this the appropriate time for you to go through some of them, or would you like to hold off?
Those were the two that I was talking about just
Yeah, that was a
because
good
it's
fact.
interesting.
That was a good one. That's definitely no rabbit hole down there. That's interesting. And it shows you how troubling families can be.
Sure, I have one more that I forgot about, and so Lafayette died when he was 76 years old in Paris in 1834, and he was laid to rest next to his wife in one of the main cemeteries in Paris. However, he had an interesting request in his will. He wanted to be buried in both American and French soil. So his son had his coffin buried, covered by dirt that had been taken from Bunker Hill in 1825, when the Marquis was in Boston to lay the cornerstone at the monument that marks the battlefield. So he is buried on French soil under American earth.
That's fucking fantastic. And guys, here's something that I think a lot of people don't realize. We joke as Americans a lot about the French and their willingness to fight and their willingness to do this and that. What are the colors of the French flag?
Red, white, and blue.
What colors are the American flag?
Red, white, and blue.
That's not a fucking mistake, guys. There's a lot there. What revolution occurred in France right after the American Revolution?
The French Revolution.
Which was a battle against what? Monarchy rule?
I was going to say royal oppressors.
Right. We have a lot in common with the French. We are very much tied to, if today you could say, yes, the British are one of our greatest allies, but our oldest and the most dependable ally we have ever had has been the French. And that is something that I will say that, yes, maybe they're not the battle-hardened force that they used to be, but that battle-hardened force was underneath tyrannical rule. I mean, Napoleon, those guys were friggin' imperialistic friggin' monarchs who ruled with an iron terror. Louis was not known to be a good king. If you ever seen The Man in the Iron Mask, Leonardo DiCaprio was a mean motherfucker. So, obviously there's some things that we have in common with them. So that doesn't surprise me, although that is such a cool story, considering the fact that Lafayette was such an intrinsic part and a pivotal man in the battle for our own freedom and liberty. So that's awesome. Thank you for that. Appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. Absolutely.
So back to the planning phase, right? So after Washington offered the command of the new 5,000 strong advance force to General Lafayette, Charles Lee didn't react well. First of all, General Washington made no friggin' qualms about it. He offered the extra 5,000 guys because he saw that Lafayette, with his youth and notwithstanding his ability to lead, but he needed a couple extra guys. He wasn't the hardened battle leader that Charles Lee was. And it was not a slap in the face to Charles Lee. It's like, look, if I've got to give this mission to another guy, I'm going to give it to a guy I trust, but he's going to need 5,000 more men, or he's going to need another 1,000 men. So I'm going to give him this extra 1,000 men. Soon as that happened, Charles Lee changed his mind and went in demanding to be given command of the force. Washington, following his devotion to classic chain of command, relented and gave the command to Lee despite his initial denial of the offer and changing of his mind after Lafayette was then offered the appointment. I think this is by far Lee's biggest fucking scumbag move. The denial of the 4,000 men, didn't want to be one-upped by the French guy who, as a former British officer, probably didn't like him to begin with. And so then he turns around and he acts this in a childish manner, if you will. And if you guys want to see historically what Charles Lee looks like, and not just Jeff and Andrews, but go watch Hamilton. Go watch the Broadway show Hamilton. Charles Lee has a character in that show, and he is as much of a little Weasley scumbag as we're putting him out to be in that show. And that is done by liberal people who really probably could care less about someone, whether or not someone is a good guy or a bad guy in a show. They couldn't deny his scumbaggery. So the guy was a giant turd. Lee met with his force's subordinates, and despite the clear orders from Washington to advance his forces to the British rear guard and attack the Monmouth courthouse, he failed to convey these orders, is what they say. He failed to convey the orders. The failure resulted in a poorly executed and disorganized attack on June 28th against the British rear guard, who was under the command of then British General Charles Cornwallis. If you're going to fuck something up against the British friggin' force, don't do it against Cornwallis's forces. I mean, this guy's forgot more about war than most people ever knew. This guy was the most highly respected friggin' wartime general in the world at the time. He was just sitting there waiting for Howe to fuck up so he could take over, and he did. But Cornwallis is not the guy to fuck up against, and Lee did. and Cornwallis took full advantage of it. In abnormally hot weather, and after hours of a weakly executed attack, the Continental forces conducted a retreat, and during this was counterattacked by Cornwallis's forces, leading General Lee to order a full withdrawal from his 5,000 attacking a rear guard of just a couple hundred. I mean, put that into account. So it's really terrible. Washington's main effort advanced to the Monmouth Road, where he was not informed of Lee's withdrawal, and he started to run into his advanced troops in a disorganized retreat. He continuously ran into men from the advance force as he traveled, and then finally came face to face with Lee himself, who had the British forces not far behind him in full hot-on pursuit. I mean, they were coming. Washington was known for his composure, and he was well known that he rarely lost his temper in front of anyone except for close friends or family members. This ability to hold tight his bearing and not get emotional despite the situation was one of his most notably famous character traits. This guy held his composure. He didn't lose his temper. He kind of was very
even-keeled,
judicious, saw a situation for what it was. Washington was frustrated with the obvious failure of Lee to execute his orders as directed, and after several attempts by Lee to argue his disregard for Washington's orders as he disagreed with his plans, Lee then proceeded to claim that the troops themselves were not performing, and instead of bravely facing the troops, that they were retreating in cowardice in the face of the British and Hessian forces. Go ahead. I know you want to say something.
I was going to say, this is like buddy fucking in the extreme.
So Washington, in a rare instance of losing his composure, went off on General Lee after hearing the disparaging comments about Lee's own troops' courage. Washington had spent a harsh winter at Valley Forge with these very soldiers. He knew he knew what their hearts were, and they were far more dedicated to victory than Lee's excuses were. He believed that in the training that Von Stueben had conducted with these men, and after the barrage of excuses and disregard to the orders Lee had been given, he just couldn't handle anymore, and friggin' Washington went Rochambeau on Lee. I mean, they say that there were accounts of this where I think one general said, actually Alexander Hamilton said that if the leaves on the trees could be conscious, they would be shaking in fear at what they saw. I mean, this is how bad it was. I mean, on top of the fact that you have this guy who's very large and imposing, Washington was a big dude, who never loses his temper, now has finally been pushed to losing his temper totally. And because you're calling his men cowards, men that he trusted and men that you can't even own the fact that you fucked up. You have to put it on these guys. And legend says he went up one side of Lee and down the other, called him names that even today would be considered epic. One of the generals who was president that quoted "the leaves on the trees shook." That was Hamilton that said that. Yeah, man, he gave him what for? He gave him what for?
What for, and then some.
And then some. So tell us what was the then some?
Sure. Sure. So Washington fired Lee on the spot
Nice.
And sent him to the rear. Just said, "Get your ass out of here. We're done. You done. You burnt. You finished."
Here's a little something. I don't know if it was in there, but he actually asked Lafayette to escort him off the battlefield. So Lafayette had to and apparently Lafayette didn't hold back his opinions about Lee on the moment either.
Cool history with these guys coming together. And then Washington doesn't go to the rear. He goes forward and goes to rally Lee's troops. He consolidates them. He inspires them and stops the withdrawal. His efforts and the heat actually in pictures of Washington from the era paintings, you see Washington riding a white horse. It was a gift. And he actually rides this horse to death. One of his favorite animals rides this horse to death, trying to stop the retreat and rally his men. So obviously there's real commitment. After Lafayette takes Lee back to the sin bin and comes back, Washington places him in command of the troops, and they all consolidate on the West Ravine at Monmouth Courthouse, right on, I think it's now called Freehold Meeting House Road.
Freehold, yeah. Freehold is the name of the town. That Monmouth, it's the cornerstone of the Monmouth County. Monmouth County's like its main effort is Freehold. That's where I grew up, is in Freehold, New Jersey. And the Monmouth Courthouse is right there in the center of town, in Old Freehold.
Lafayette now has the vanguard, the advanced troops, and Washington kept the remaining 5,000 men in the center and put General Greene, who is another one of his leading commanders, in forces to the right, and General Sterling, along with Lafayette's new force, on his right. So we have Greene on the left and Lafayette and Sterling on the right and Washington in the center. The forces begin to prepare to receive the British armed forces, and artillery was placed on both wings of the area for a couple of reasons. One, to draw on the British, but two, we're not talking modern artillery, we're talking cannonballs. So they were more effective when they grazed the front ranks or moved laterally with the enemy. You could, instead of hitting 2 or 3 men standing in a file, you could take out 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 by going with plunging fire along the ranks. So it was a better position for Henry Knox's artillery.
Henry Knox,
my boy,
your
book
man.
selling.
It's your man right there. Go ahead.
So the heat was hot. We've mentioned that it was abnormally high during this period, and they were really the heat was really taking its toll of the forces as they awaited the advancing British troops. So one of the wives of one of the American troops began bringing water from a nearby well and distributing it amongst the men. This was Mary Ludwig Hayes, who was the wife of William Hayes, who was an artillery and in Proctor's 4th Artillery. Both had been with the Continental Army in Valley Forge, and Mary was part of a group of women led by Martha Washington, known as the Camp Followers.
You brought that big giant bowl for Martha. She was a good wife. Had a big bowl waiting for Washington every day. You remember Dazed and Confused? You seen Dazed and Confused? Oh, never mind. You're not going to get the joke. There's going to be plenty of people out there that are going to get that joke about Martha Washington bringing weed to General Washington every day at the end of the battles.
I was confused. I thought you meant like a bowl of wine or water or something, and now it makes sense.
Yeah,
so I'm an innocent. I apologize.
Shut up. You went to college.
I did. She definitely did.
They own plantations in Virginia. If you don't think they grew hemp.
Yep. The hobbit weed.
Mm.
She and other camp followers served as water carriers, bringing waters to troops, to drilling during training at Valley Forge, and to help artillery teams cool down hot cannon barrels. Troops would call for water during the drills by shouting. But they would shout, Molly Pitcher. Molly Pitcher.
That's what they would yell. They would shout that moniker that she eventually got was the title of the thing they would yell, because they were just called Mollies. Molly was a word for women at the time. Pitchers of water needed to be called, so they would yell, "Hey, Molly Pitcher!" And somebody would bring a pitcher. Molly would bring a pitcher of water.
So this is where she likely got her nickname. During the battle, Mary's husband collapsed from either heat exhaustion or from a wound, and she ended up actually saying, "Y'all can get your own water. I'm gonna fight." So she ended up taking up his position on the cannon that he was manning, and spent the day swabbing and loading the gun.
Swabbing the deck, or swabbing the cannon.
Swabbing the barrel. Yep. So and loading the gun. And
we'll leave that one alone.
Yep. We've had enough profanity and
we'll leave that one alone.
Yeah. And we're not talking light little, 2-inch shells. We're talking 6-pounders, 7-pounders, 8-pounders, 9-pounders, like heavy steel cannonballs.
This was hard work being on a cannon crew at the time.
It was backbreaking labor. No pun intended, especially considering these aren't modern guns with that recoil and don't move. You had to roll them back into place. So she was definitely doing some pretty serious work. So next time somebody tells you women can't fight, point them all at Pitcher and tell them to get their mind out.
Point to the one woman in history that you can use as an example. I'm just kidding. I'm just joking. We're going to have an episode on women in combat. It'll be 10 minutes long.
Jeff is more progressive than he'll let.
Well, I am very much.
Yeah. It's said that a British round, while she was manning the gun, flew between her legs and tore the bottom of her petticoat. She reportedly said something along the lines of, "Well, that could have been worse," and went straight back to work.
I love this story. I love it. And there's a couple of things they said that she may have said. This one I picked specifically because I love that story. I could see in a movie, like Jennifer Lawrence playing Molly Pitcher, in a friggin' round coming up through her petticoat in the bottom, and she'd be like, "Well, that could have been worse," and then just right back to work again. It makes, I don't know if it happened or not, but I want to believe it did, because it endears her to people so much. I mean, regardless of whether it happened or not, she was out there doing what they said she was doing. On top of the fact that she was helping the wounded. She was bringing water when she could. But that story is just fantastic. That could have been worse.
And you know, we need to make it clear that Molly Pitcher is an amalgamation of a lot of folks. So when you hear people talk about Molly Pitcher, it's not just Mary Hayes. It's other women who were there throughout the Revolutionary period. However, you know, what we're talking about specifically right here is all about Mary Hayes, who's become sort of the personification of Molly Pitcher in an individual.
Yes, there are two actual Molly Pitcher's wells that are marked at Monmouth Battleground. So if you ever get a chance to go there, note that the one that they have, like the main one, is very likely not the one that she really went to. You'll have to ask the people there at the park to show you the other one. The other one has been kind of widely considered to be the one that she really did use, because it was kind of like off the beaten trail of movement, and it was down inside like a gully where she would have probably moved to avoid British forces to get this water and bring back. So interesting story. I wanted to throw it in there only because Molly Pitcher is an important part of the revolution, but also because I wanted to give anyone who ever had the chance to go there a little bit of that tidbit of Monmouth Battleground and seeing Molly Pitcher's well, because it's really cool. Moving on. To make sure I ripped out my thing, so we have to. Okay. So moving on then, General Cornwallis and the British forces made many attempts at all three fronts in the American battle lines. The battle went on for hours. Neither side really made any notable gain or took any advantage was taken on the other during that time period. This eventually led to a British forces finally pulling back in retreat at 6 p.m. that evening. So right about dusk, right when things started getting dark. Washington's desire was to keep after them after retreating. The British forces moved out into the darkness, failing to put an end to the fighting, and Washington had saw them setting up fires in camps across this open area and said, okay, well, they're obviously camping up for the night. I've got a lot of wounded. Let's take a break and we'll just pick up and go after them in the morning. The battle was in truth a draw because it was a ruse by the British. They set these fires and then they continued to withdraw over the nighttime. And that withdrawal under auspiciously clandestine movements by tricking the American forces with these fires is where you get the American historians saying that it was an American victory because they pulled back. In all aspects, it was a draw. I mean, although the Americans held the field at the end of it, the British were able to get away with what in fact was the majority of their forces. And so both armies met their intent with the battle that day. So therefore, I would say it's probably a draw. But here's some numbers for you. British casualties historically were 124 dead, 170 wounded, and 64 missing. The American casualties were 69 dead, 161 wounded, and 132 missing. 37 of these missing were found and have all died from heat stroke later on. So you can say that's a combat wound or not. It's on you. An unofficial estimate, which is the estimate that is given by everyone but the British, because the British didn't own this, places the casualty of the British forces at 1,134 British and 500 American casualties. And that number comes from the Hessians and the French assessment of the battle. So neither the Americans nor the British had anything to do with these numbers. So therefore, I would say those are probably the true numbers, because neither side. Mm-hmm. General Charles Lee, our buddy over there.
Shithill Lee.
Yeah, Shithill Lee was later court-martialed for his actions and found guilty. He was punished with relief of his command for 1 year. Lee continued to protest the verdict and punishment, leading up to him writing a very scathing letter to Congress in protest. Congress then, in response, informed Lee that they no longer had need for his services. Lee never held military command again, and 1 year after the British Battle of Yorktown, he died of yellow fever. So everything that Lee had coming to him, he got.
And yellow fever is not exactly an easy way to go, so clearly he suffered at the end, which
maybe if
he
he
deserved.
boiled some water and
Yep.
waited to see what happened with the yellow fever, he might have survived it.
Yep.
So
clearly.
The Battle of Monmouth itself was the largest artillery battle of the American Revolution. I know you're a big fan of the artillery stuff with your boy Knox, so you haven't want to say anything about that?
I just, I think that and this is just personal opinion, not based on terribly much research, but it's noteworthy that all this artillery was there because it was relatively hard to come by. In North America, there weren't a ton of locations where you could cast and create a cannon out of whole cloth, right? From soup to nuts, you couldn't do it. So the fact that Washington was able to concentrate so much of the artillery train there and was able to pull so much away from other fronts, the South, the Carolinas, move it from New England, where, New Englanders had pulled it from places like Fort Ticonderoga and placed it around Boston. It really speaks to Washington's forethought and his ability to pull resources from, frankly, people who didn't want to let it go because he saw the greater good and the real needs.
Right. Yeah. Well,
and Henry Knox was a goddamn pimp. So
we are going to do a show on Henry Knox, and it's not just going to be about, Fort Knox. I promise you. I will give Andrew his male crush on Mr. Knox, General Knox, Colonel Knox,
General Knox,
Amanda Knox, whatever Knox he wants to go into. I mean, Amanda Knox still killing it after all these years. She was kind of innocent. So Monmouth Battleground, although there is no official preservations in place, is considered to be one of the best preserved battlefields of the Revolutionary War period, and that's because it is the New Jersey version of the Charleston area or the areas that are in Virginia that they build up. So it's well preserved. Like I said, it's beautiful battlefield to go out and take a look at. You can find musket balls out there. I know that because they used to pay us to go out there and drop them there for everyone to find. Growing up in New Jersey, we had to keep the people coming in. Here, go drop some musket balls out there. Some kids will find them, and it's also where kids used to go get Jimson weed to smoke and take. Do not do that, kids. It's bad for you. Having said that, I do encourage going out there and visiting this. Not only that, but Andrew, kind of a sidebar here. Have you been to any preserved battlefields in the United States? And because I recommend the Monmouth Battleground to go take a look at it. Is there any that you have been to that you would recommend? Because it's something that I think we need to promote a little bit more. People need to go out and check these places out.
Sure. So down in Connecticut, outside New London, there's a preserved Revolutionary War fort that actually, when the British attacked and burnt New London, they continued on and massacred all of the colonial soldiers there. Oh, wow. So that's one.
Sounds like an awesome place to go, and really, feels like you're going to visit a friggin' concentration camp.
Well, we were studying the Revolutionary War in Connecticut, and it was, obviously a pretty big part of it. So there was that, and Bunker Hill isn't really preserved because it's all houses now, but I've definitely spent a lot of time there being, it's in my backyard. Ditto Lexington, Concord. One of the places I've always wanted to go, and this is Civil War, obviously, is Gettysburg, just because I think it's
funny you should mention that. I think next summer we should plan a trip, and next summer we'll go to Gettysburg, and then we'll do it. I want to do a show from Gettysburg.
Let's do it. Let's do it at night with all the ghosts.
No, maybe we can make it a Halloween episode where we do the historic background of it, and then we talk to the ghost of Pickett's Pickett's last charge and all that shit. So.
Third lieutenant under
whatever the fuck
secretary who got killed at the Angle. Yeah, that sounds great. Let's do that.
Awesome, man. So, Andrew, I want to thank you for coming out to this morning. I know you have a very busy life there going on. You're doing a great job with being a dad, man. I just want to let you know, and I'm happy for you with your new job. Although we didn't get into it too much, we kind of keep that stuff on the DL about what we do for a living. But I'm really looking forward to the next episode we're going to be doing together, which will be coming up very shortly because me and him have a very good plan. Do you want to give everyone a little bit of a hint as to what the next show is going to be? You've made mention of it a couple times here. So.
I've made mention of it, and it's unless something changes, we're going to be doing the Battle of Breed's Hill, which is better known to you all as the Battle of Bunker Hill.
Yes.
So
yes,
we'll be going
good doctor involved.
Yep, we'll be going from Jeff's backyard to my backyard.
Right on. I can't wait to do that. That'll be actually not too far in the future. We're going to be doing that one kind of quick because I'm doing that one, and then also, guys, just so you know, Sam Culper from Breakers Podcast, Sam Culper, will be coming on, and he will be doing a joint show with me on Washington Spies. Funny, Sam Culper, the Culper Ring. He'll be doing the Washington Spies show with me. And so we got a lot of good Revolutionary War shows coming your way now that we are back off break. So thank you guys for coming out today and listening to the show. Make sure you download, share, go to Patreon, spend some of your hard-earned money on guys like me.
Give us your money.
Give us your money. I mean, give us your money.
For real. Give us your money.
For really. Because if you can really send me your money, then I can stop missing shows because I'll be doing this full time. I feel bad saying that, but at this point I have to because we does take some money out of our pockets to promote and make these shows. So we are not at risk of shutting down, guys. So don't think about that. But if you really like the show, tell us how you like it. Drop a couple dollars at us. So
yep, I'll take your money.
I'll take your money all day long. I'll let Andrew take your money, and then I'll feel better about it, knowing that Andrew took it, and I'll just blame it on him. Thank you, Andrew, for coming on today, guys. Make sure you get out there and live your life according to the way you want to live your life. Do not let anyone else tell you how to live your life. Free the oppressed. Free your own caged mind. We will see you guys next week. The Oppressively Bear.